My name is Monica Wilkinson Kelly. I'm the archivist at the Edith B. Ford Memorial Library in Ovid, New York. This interview is being conducted as part of the Cayuga and Seneca Lakes Agriculture and Craft Beverage Memory Project. Today is October 1st, 2020, and I am interviewing Carol and Jim Doolittle of Frontenac Point Vineyard and Estate Winery. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning.
So can you state your full name?
My name is James Doolittle.
Okay, and
Carol Strasberg Doolittle, actually, if we throw
Okay.
in the maiden name.
good morning.
Good morning, Monica.
So, Jim, can you please tell me a little about where you're from and your education?
Yes, I'm originally from Elmira, New York, and I did not come from an agricultural background. I had a great interest in biology, which led me to the College of Agriculture at Cornell. But since I had very little experience in agriculture at that point, a lot of the coursework at Cornell was not dedicated to my background. So I just somehow gravitated towards marketing and economics, which over a period of time led me to be working with the Department of Agriculture and Markets in Albany, New York, as a senior marketing representative. The position there was primarily to develop new markets for basically New York farm products, not produced products, but farm products. And over the years, it became pretty obvious that one of the great unique factors that New York had in its favor was the fact we had the largest grape growing state for native grapes in the nation. And that made it a rather unique product that could be basically exported to anywhere we could find a place to sell it. That eventually got me into the interest in wine, which got me interested in getting another degree in viticulture at Cornell 7 years later. At which point my talents got turned into forming part of the committee working with Mary Ann Krupsak to get the small winery law passed. I had some economic input in that creation of that law, which was in need.
Right, and Carol, what about you? Could you tell me about your educational background?
I'm from Albany, New York. I had my degrees in journalism. I was in the marketing department and then public relations department at the Ag and Markets department, where I met Jim. We got married and worked there very blissfully until he comes to me one day and says, we ought to have a farm winery after the farm winery law was passed. And I said, sure, why not? And here we are.
And so, could you tell me a little about the Farm Winery Act of 1976?
Yes, it was basically a series of amendments to the existing state liquor authority law that determined basically how a winery was to function in New York State. And at the time, the market for New York State wine grapes was beginning to tank. The big wineries, of which there were predominantly 7 of the 19, were cutting back in prices and cutting back on basically their quantities of purchasing. And a lot of growers, and there were a couple of thousand, were facing a real crisis. And it occurred to a few people that maybe we should be able to have our own wineries, but the restrictions are so stringent and expensive that it was impractical. Like you could only sell 5% of what you produced from your own grapes under that law to sell personally. The rest had to go through the 3-tier system, which means you were going to get half price. That was one of the amendments that allowed us to sell everything we produced directly to the consumer, if we so wished. Also, it granted us a wholesale and a distributor's license at the same time. So you could go any one of those 3 routes, all 3 if you wished. The other factor was the limitation on the amount of gallons you could produce, and it was started off originally at 25,000. And I knew very well that simply that couldn't fly. That's just not enough production headspace for somebody who really would like to start a serious winery at a farm winery level. So we got that amended to read 50,000. I believe that's been increased past perhaps up to 200,000 at this point. Those are the 2 main concerns that they addressed. And within 2 years, we had more than 40 new wineries.
Wow. And
In
how
the
long did
meantime,
that
all of the other wineries have disappeared.
how long did that legislation take place? How many months and
It's
years?
about 18 months overall from the time I joined the Krupps Act team, so to speak, to put the thing on the road.
And Mary Ann Krupsak was lieutenant governor at that time.
Yes.
Okay. So a part of the difference was the reduced license fee. I read it was $625 to.
No, it was 1,500 plus.
Wow.
Whatever they wish to tack on. And the State Liquor Authority was quite amazing about finding new fees to add, but he dropped it to 125. If you're investing $500,000 or so in a new building and equipment, that's not a huge piece of change, but for somebody starting off with a few barrels, that's a big difference. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. For those who started off with a larger input, I'm sure they didn't notice it, but they were certainly grateful for the fact that they could now sell what they produced directly from their own premises.
And at other locations as well, correct?
Right.
Up to 5 satellite?
Now, we had none at the time.
None
It's
at the
now
time.
been, I think there's five. There's been a number of amendments that have been added since then over the past 40 years.
And you are on the western shore of Cayuga Lake. And when did you buy the land and decide to move here and start your own?
We bought the
vineyard?
land on New Year's Day, 1977. Planted our first 3 acres of grapes in 1978. Riesling, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon, Marichal Foch, and Chalois. We had 4 subsequent plantings to that, to the point we're up to 25 acres, of which we've now reduced back to 17 for basically a number of viticultural reasons.
Carol, what did you think about moving to the Finger Lakes and starting a new venture from working as a journalist?
Sounded like fun.
Sounded like fun.
Plus, I also got a job at Cornell in my career field as marketing director for Cornell Cooperative Extension, the College of Ag, and College of Human Ecology. So I was doing down there for 20 years, 21 years, what I trained to do, working here on the farm on weekends, which was a lot of fun. It really was. When I took early retirement from Cornell in 2000, I took with me a pension, and things are just very, very pleasant for both of us. Jim is doing what he wants to do, make wine, enjoy his fruits of his labor. And it's one of those things where it's a lifestyle, not just a business or commercial enterprise. Yeah. And the various wineries are all different. Some of them are strictly business, and they just happen to be making wine. Jim made wine to become an enterprise or a business, and I supported it.
Oh, wonderful. It takes 3 years for the vines to produce grapes, correct?
Yes.
So you had your first, well,
3 years you get grapes, but they are not really fully ripened in terms of components. They're young, they're kind of brash and green. It's okay if you have fruits that are produced from older vines to blend in with, but we didn't make our first vintage until 1981. And we found that after 7 years of production, the character of our wines changed completely, and it was because they had fully matured. But they were sufficient quality that we were able to make 2 small vintages for sale in 1980, I think it was 83. We released our first 2 wines, a red and a white. And then subsequently, we have increased our production to 12, 13 varieties and champagne. Or sparkling wine, I'm sorry, that's the proper term.
So everyone had a winery license number. Where are you? Number 44, did
Yes.
I read?
Correct.
44.
44.
And now there are more than 400 wineries.
Wow.
In New York State. Some of those would be commercial licenses. I don't know the exact breakdown.
And
most of them are farm wineries.
And this is all because of the Farm Winery Act of 1976. Without that legislation, none of this would have happened, or
Correct.
would have happened at
It wouldn't have
different
happened,
time.
period.
Period.
And it benefited the growers too, because 100% of our wine juice, grapes, have to come from New York State grapes. So it's not like in New York State, to be in New York State wine, you can buy juice from other states or other countries. In order to be a farm winery legislation has to be 100% New York grapes.
And in your case, you are an estate winery, which means,
We produce our wine only from our own grapes.
okay, so that's
That's
very
a federal
significant.
law. That's all over the country. In California too, if you see winery name, estate winery, you know that they produce their wine only from the grapes grown on their estate or their property.
And estate bottled as well.
Estate bottled would be they grow their grapes for that bottle of wine or for that variety of wine on their property, on their estate. But other wines that they produce may not be from their grapes. It may be from a grower, a New York State grower. It's sort of complicated, but it is. And it's pretty linear. And it's very good for the whole economy, for the people who don't want to have a winery and produce wine and deal with the selling of wine. They just love to grow grapes. There's many growers around that we know personally, and they just love to grow grapes and work in the vineyard. And so they're supported fully by New York State wineries.
Speaking of grapes, what types of grapes are you growing currently?
Well, we have 9 predominant varieties. About 3 acres of Riesling, half an acre of Chardonnay, small amount of Pinot Noir, 4 acres of Chambourcin, 3 acres of Seyval, half an acre of Ravat 51, and we're expanding our Maréchal Foch to another 3 acres. We're finding that grape seems to do very, very well in our climate, producing red wine. When it's ripened properly, it makes a very distinctive product.
And it's a French-grown grape, French-originated grape, so it's got European history in its heritage.
You were growing then grapes to make red wine very early. Many of the other wineries were producing Riesling in the area. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that was one of my goals when we came here, because I'd had the opportunity to make wine, some from varieties that we had bought in the Finger Lakes when we lived in Schenectady. And I found a couple of red varieties that really did very well in our climate, that were very well adapted to it and produced European-style wine. So I came down here with the idea we were going to be predominantly a red wine producer. That's been scaled back to about 50% of our production now. But you have to adapt your climate to the grape. And just because you grow French grapes or German grapes or Italian grapes, necessarily it's not going to taste or produce as well or produces quality product just because it's that grape. It needs to be adapted and acceptable to our climate. And we've been finding a few new ones have been coming online here, especially from Austria, are very well adapted to our climate. And just, I think it's only a matter of time before they begin to make an appearance basically in our viticulture.
Here in Trumansburg, New York, we're on the western shore of Cayuga Lake. What can you tell me about the microclimate and how does that impact your wine and winemaking and grape growing?
The microclimate is why we bought the place. This used to be a fruit farm producing varieties of peaches, plums, cherries, which are very difficult to grow at this elevation. But 2 miles down the road from us is the deepest point of the lake. It's about 430 feet. And that extends our growing season here by almost 2 weeks. It's unusual for us to get a frost before early November, usually mid-November, unless it's a freak. And it holds the growing season back a bit in the spring, keeping things cold and chilled because, again, it's just a heat sink, and that helps prevent frost early in the season for us. So we basically have a growing season about 10 days to 2 weeks longer than this elevation, say, anywhere else without a lake. Because normally it should be about October 1st to October 7th when you get a frost. And again, here it's rare we get one before November.
And what can you tell me about the soil here? What makes it unique?
Our soil here is basically two types. Cazenovia silt loam, which is about 18 inches of a silt on top of yellow clay. And we found when we dug the hole for this building, we have a gravel bed about 6 inches deep laying on top of shale. That was deposited here by the glacier. So we suspect that when our vines turned 7 years old, they were down there drinking from that part of the soil. And they had a lot to do with why the character of our grapes changed. And even when it's dry, they suffer, but they've been doing fine. I'm sure it's because our soil isn't terribly deep. 6 feet is more than adequate when you've got that basic drainage underneath.
So the mineral quality is different from parts of one vineyard to another, from what I understand.
That's one of the reasons. That's actually the biggest reason. Our Riesling here tastes completely different, say, than Herman Weimer's Riesling over on Seneca Lake. There's nothing I can do to emulate it in terms of winemaking ability. It's just simply, that's the way it is. There's a friend of ours once said, grapevine is a pump. Whatever's down there, it pumps up. And whatever's in the mineral content comes up with it. And if it's a different mineral content, that's what you get. And so whatever's down here is distinctly different from just up the road. It may be very subtle, or it could be quite distinctive, as I'm finding our Rieslings really vary in flavors all over the Finger Lakes.
And while we're at Trumansburg address, we're actually in the town of Covert in Seneca County. Now, I realize that climate and the nature doesn't recognize county boundaries or state lines, but it does make a difference in terms of Trumansburg is a much higher elevation than we are in the town of Covert down here.
Right. I was giving you address. You're
Yes.
mailing address.
We have the additional advantage of being at the southern end of the Lake Ontario isobar. It ends down at Tacanic Park. So we get the benefit of the deep waters of that lake here. And the coldest temperature I've ever recorded is 4 below zero at this site, which had been at any other elevation be 20 to 25 below.
Trumansburg was higher, yeah.
And isn't there also a benefit, the wind direction? You have a warming element as the winds move across. Is it?
Our winds are predominantly out of the northwest here, as you can feel it now.
Yeah. And how many cases did you produce the first year?
300.
300. And what is the current production level?
We're doing less. We're doing between 1 and 2,000. I was above that for a while because we were doing a lot of wholesale business with retail shops and restaurants directly. But here now we're strictly, unless we get a phone call from somebody in the retail business, we're basically distributing directly out of our own facility. And we're only open 6 months of the year.
And what are the changes that you have seen in technology that have improved grape growing or harvesting over the years?
In terms of grape growing, the biggest change in technology has been, in my opinion, the fact that we're using fungicides and insecticides. Well, I don't even use insecticides here. But our vineyard chemicals we use to control fungus diseases have gotten far more benevolent. In fact, one of them is being made from mushroom derivatives. We used to use a lot of chemicals that would be marked danger, and they meant danger. And now they're almost, don't worry about it, wear a mask. In terms of technology in the winemaking, we've made more progress in getting new kinds of winemaking tools in terms of the materials we can work with, produce higher quality wines more consistently in the past 20 years than probably in the first 2 millennia of wine production. The progress has been just dramatically remarkable.
What is the physical level of work? You know, can you describe your typical day? Both of you, I don't know, Carol, would you like to start first? Describe the typical day for you here on the vineyard.
Depends. There's really no typical day for me. I have the luxury of that. I walk the dogs. We have vineyard dogs, farm dogs. A farm needs dogs, and dogs need space. I'll be on the computer answering calls, questions from people who might want to come here or order wine, doing the wine tasting list, creating and modifying that, and then sometimes out in the vineyard, sometimes for an hour or two, sometimes for 8 hours, either finishing up tying or doing a special project, taking off low-growing fruit, just finishing things, not doing the main. When we first started, Jim would do the pruning, and I would come behind and pull the brush off the wires. It was much more defined in terms of my day then, but I have the luxury now of doing what needs to be done, but it's not, that 9 to 5 job. Jim is much more strict what has to be done because he takes care of the vineyard and he makes the wine and he racks the wine and he bottles the wine and I make the dinner.
Yeah, there's no typical day here. Start out with 3 projects in a default mode. Okay, which one isn't going to get done today? First, what's the weather going to be like? And that took a long time to adjust to. No, I know I was doing this, but it's not going to get done. My day is basically in the summertime devoted to tending in the vineyard. And beginning late summer, it shifts more into winemaking efforts in the cellar and harvesting. We're using crews where I used to do most of the work out there. We're using crew. We're highly skilled in what they do and do it much faster than I could because I'm kind of fussy. They can do it. They're doing a fine job, both in the vineyard and in harvesting effort. And again, they're contingent upon weather issues too.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you both planted the vines. Is that fair to say? And that was physical, very difficult work, I'm guessing. And now you have GPS, I understand, or one can have all of that planted with greater ease than planting them all by hand.
We didn't do it by hand. There was an old mechanical planter
where
it's pulled behind a tractor. It's like a sulky, and you're sitting kind of like in a sulky, a horse sulky, and you have the plants in a trough in front of you, and there's like a plow that opens up a line of dirt, and you take the plant out and you put it in that opening, which is just basically a slit. So, and then there's wheels behind the sulky that come in and push the dirt into the roots. And then somebody is usually walking behind that, tamping that down again. So it was kind of mechanical, even though it was somebody driving the tractor and somebody actually working in the planting sulky. Now when we replant by hand because the trellis system, then you put the trellis system in after we did a massive plantings. We replant by hand, shovels, because the trellis system is already in. So you can't drive anything through that. If you redo a whole vineyard and take all the wires and the posts out, then you can get back to using what's now much more modern technology than the planting sulky, I called it. The GPS for straight lines. Jim eyeballed straight lines, and they're straight. So that's what you did.
There's no easy mechanical way in the pruning part of this, correct? You're out in the winter, early spring. What's that like? What's the schedule like to maintain the vineyards each year?
We wait until the vines are dormant and the wood is hardened. I wait a little longer here because I like to see some really cold periods where we're down to at least 10 degrees for several days. And it hardens the wood off and the buds. And it makes it safe. If you start too early and you get a sudden warm spell and a snap like that can basically rupture the buds. They'll start to blossom again and then bango, they're gone. You can't put them back on. So it's much safer to wait till, it's still a game plan, but at least the odds are more in your favor. We don't really start pruning here until end of January, February. I used to start in December when things were good, but that was when I was doing it myself and trying to prune 15 acres by hand, one person. It's a little difficult.
How many employees do you have now? Your son is now involved. It's going to be a family tradition at this point.
We don't have any employees here per se. We hire crews to do the bulk of the work that we can't handle in the vineyard and at harvest time. basically just a family operation. And we have interns, some of whom are viticulture program at Cornell, some with hotel school, some are engineers. It's amazing to see what we've got in terms of interest.
Fantastic.
But they just would like to learn something about the wine business. And being such a personally internal operation, it's not difficult to feed them in and show them what we do and let them go at it. And I'm happy the fact we've had at least a half a dozen of these quote interns have wound up with some pretty serious positions in the wine and spirits industry in the past 20 years.
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yes. And Larry's more interested in pulling the pieces together. You know, he's let Dad make the wine. He does that so well. Let him do that. And then you can work with crews of people to really work the bulk of the vineyard. So he's more interested in the, just bringing it around together so that the whole pieces work. Jim focused on the wine. I focused on marketing. He focused on the viticulture. I focused on the tasting room. It was what we could do. So now that we have that third very intelligent person, our son, he's kind of drawing it all together, which is just fantastic.
And what is your market? What do you consider, your market to be in your wines?
Well, since they're all coming from here now, we're relying on the tourist trade, but there are two distinct groups here. We're finding that it's changed a bit this year because of the COVID situation, pretty dramatically, actually. We have a tourist who's looking basically to be at least entertained, sometimes interested in being educated. And in the fall, then we get serious wine drinkers, knowledgeable people who come, and the market shifts from selling bottles to selling cases. We're just now entering fall, and I think we're only experiencing what everybody else is because we're limited in our seating capacity. We're all pretty much almost overwhelmed, which in a way should be good, but it's difficult in that trying to keep spacing. A market, again, we're going to find out just who shows up this year.
Well, it's difficult for the tourists too.
But in the sense of the type of wine, you really focus on dry wines. Yes, that's what I meant as far as your market being, dry, very small.
I call myself a French winemaker.
Estate produced. Yeah. And what do you think makes you unique here at Frontenac Point Vineyard and Estate Winery?
A couple of our reds are very unique. And we produce Riesling, as do just about everybody else, but ours is dry, Alsatian style. Our Chardonnay is very French in character due to the fact of just the way I make it. And we have a number of very unique other wines that are just blends, just strictly adhering to my original philosophy of great wine doesn't necessarily mean it's a single variety, it's a combination of components. And being small, I can make experiments here that don't necessarily break the bank in case they don't work, they're failures. We haven't had too much of that. Try to anticipate what might be a distinctive, unique spot in the market for a different style wine. And that's why we have 12 to 14, even though we have very limited production. Back in 1982, we produced the first and most expensive white wine ever made in New York State. Our Chardonnay had gone to rot. It was botrytis rot. And I was disappointed because that meant no Chardonnay crop, but Carol and her aunt went out and picked it all. And I got 2 huge 5-gallon buckets of very rotten grapes that I beat with a baseball bat. It was pretty disgusting looking stuff. Fermented it, and it came out absolutely brilliantly clear, and it was Trockenbaron Auslese style. We sold it for $16 a half bottle, wholesale. And I got almost the same revenue generation off those 7 cases as I would have off a full Chardonnay crop. Well, that was a fortunate event. I don't want
Serendipity.
ever, I wouldn't do it again. And I certainly wouldn't do it as a part of production activity. It's just too much trouble.
It's fun.
So the tanks, are they stainless steel and then you go to oak barrels? How does
Depends on
what's-
the red wine generally goes into oak first. Then we age it. I don't like stainless steel. We use high density polyurethane plastic, which is a breathable tank. It's new. It's what projected the Australian industry into the forefront of winemaking years ago. It allows oxygen permeation, which is the same as a barrel, but no air penetration. So the wine can mature at the same rate in plastic as it does in wood. And then if you have an interest in wood, we can add wood flavors, either as wood chips or as powders. And there's dozens of them. They're being used all over the world. And the nice thing is it raises the bar for quality because you can be more consistent in terms of your production. The barrels are each barrel is unique, and they're only good for 5 years, so they have a different level of oak infusing quality built into them, whereas you can add whatever you feel is necessary to a plastic tank. It sounds like cheating, but it's not. It's just a better way of doing it.
Well, you started to talk a little about COVID. I know everyone's been impacted by that in the industry. How has that really changed your market this year? There's some restrictions.
We are only allowed 3 groups at a time in our hospitality room, but this deck out here permits us to 4 or 5 other groups out here. And being outside, it's a lot more pleasant, at least.
No, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful
We've been
spot.
blessed. We've been
And
blessed
other
with the
than
weather.
that,
Yeah.
what do you consider the most, the biggest threat, natural threat to the industry and to the crops? Is it fungus? What are you always looking for in the vineyard as a great enemy, other than deer, or deer part of it?
Here at our site, wildlife is the biggest issue because we're 3 miles from the state park, where the turkeys and the deer all breed because it's safe. And then they migrate north because that's where the food is. And we've, in the past 10 years, seen a significant increase in deer issues. This year, they've already taken out 8 rows of our Marshall Foch up near the highway. And birds were a serious issue past 2 years where they haven't been in the past. We have no explanation. It's just maybe nature's cycles. Who knows? So deer are difficult to deal with except by harvesting them. And the birds, we do have, we've got a new chemical we can use that is very effective, provided you can get it on soon enough. We had one years ago, but it was considered cruelty to animals because it made them vomit. So the alternative then was to shoot them. So I don't know, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that chemical got banned. So this new compound is no more dangerous than banana peels. You can drink it. It's methylenthranolate, which is a component of grapes. So that's the new component we have to fight against birds. Deer again.
What percentage
there's not
of
much
your
change.
grape product do you think is lost by deer? I know habitats have been lost, so I think as they've lost the habitat, the deer, they're going to go to your grape haven here.
We own 120 acres, and we only have about 17 in grapes. The deer have the rest, all to themselves. Okay. They have the woods, they have fields at the south end of our property. Our road front goes for a quarter of a mile, and then we go down to the lake at a narrow point. So they really have a lot, but they prefer to have the grapes. And there are various ways that you can deter it. In terms of birds, you can net, but that is very expensive, very labor time consuming. and costly. So, you just use a different array of tools to bring in your crop. The farmer who we bought this land from grew cherry trees. You pick sweet cherries. And he said the only way to deal with the birds for him was to grow more cherries than the birds could eat. I mean, that's another way of dealing with it. Unfortunately, you can't grow more grapes than what the birds can eat, given the flocks that have been coming in the last couple of years. But it's a battle, but it doesn't have to be that much of a battle, and it changes. It's a variety. We're very fortunate to have what we have here. So, you start with that, and then you move into the different pockets. To me, the mildews in the grapes, because of our weather, are really something that Jim has had to really fight with using the fungicides. Spraying, that's no fun. And then there's always another insect coming in, the spotted lanternfly, the brown marmorated stink bug, the Asian lady beetle. Those are other elements. But again, you work with it, you fight it, you work around it, or you quit.
Yeah.
Makes life very unpredictable for you.
But some
every
people
year.
like unpredictable. He likes dealing with the challenge that pops up, so that works for him.
Well, because the challenge of the weather, the predators, the deer, birds. So, do you have anything to add, either one of you? I have one last question. What would you tell anybody interested in a career in a winery or vineyard or craft beverage? Any suggestions?
Enjoy it, because if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're going to find every problem a major hurdle. So, get into it slowly, very slowly, unless you have a lot of money, that you want to sink. Get into it slowly financially. Otherwise, you'll find that, oh my goodness, I'm not making the money to pay the bills. And education is also very important. But you can also hire now, whereas we couldn't hire back in 1982, 79 when we started. Jim had to do all the work himself. Now you can hire vineyard crews, you can hire a winemaker, you can hire a marketing manager, or you can do it all yourself. So, you pick and choose like anything, but this is more challenging than the government jobs we had in Albany, as good as they were. This is definitely more challenging and also more rewarding, I think, for Jim anyway, for sure.
How about you, Jim?
Yeah, I say the same thing, other than especially emphasis on start small and go slowly, because you will have all the vagaries affecting you regardless of scale. It's better to learn them without losing your shirt too.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess this concludes the interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Interviewing
Been fun.
Jim and Carol Doolittle of Frontenac Point Vineyard and Estate Winery in Covert, New York, on the western shore of Cuba Lake. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.